that 10 plus 10 and 11 plus 11 are the same thing?
No.
Yeah. 10 plus 20, 10 plus 10 is 20. 11 plus 11 is 22.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same thing. They're both 20.
Uh-huh. 20 as well. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, 22. That's really good. I'm so glad I was able to get on for that one.
Yep.
Good. Good.
All right. Well, looks like we're still missing a few, so we'll wait another second or two for people to join. And we'll go from there.
Hey, how do y'all record on Zoom?
You
Is
hit
it
the
just
record
video?
button.
Well, smarty pants. If I saw a record button, oh, I do see a record button up top. It says recording
Yeah.
You may not.
You may not have the option to record.
because I don't pay for this. Like this is free with
Oh, you're
Clarita.
saying even on your end, like it would be settings for me on my end to be able to do. Now for Shaquan, she has the Otter Pilot. I don't know if you're familiar with Otter Pilot. But Otter Pilot, it will jump on and record meetings for you and then summarize the meetings, give you highlights. It's a pretty good service. You pay monthly for it, I think, and you get X amount of credits. It's kind of like a credit based. I think there's a subscription without a credit base too.
Autopilot?
Otter,
Oh,
OTT.
Otter. Okay.
I used it a lot. Sometimes what I would do is even in meetings that aren't being recorded, you can record it on your phone and upload it that way, so it could still keep track of it.
Okay. So I just want to be sure I get the right thing to Chad.
Hey guys.
Hey, Brock.
Hey, real quick, I gotta bounce out a little bit early tonight. I got a meeting right at 7.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, how do we notify you guys? Is there like a link or someone we talk to, or what's
You don't have our email addresses?
nothing?
You got no email addresses. Okay, well, I'll send you.
I just have the Zoom link, so I'm sure you guys are in there.
Yeah, no, I'll get you. I'll send it.
Okay.
I got you. Or maybe we're emailing the wrong person. I'll make sure we got you the right name on our email too. I know it's Chase the Vase is what it was, right?
Yeah, maybe I just ignore your emails. That could be it too. I don't know.
It could be a combination of all the.
Yeah, probably. Jennifer, what's up?
So much. I just got back from Tullahoma and Shelbyville, Tennessee. That was fun.
Oh, no.
It was good. Looking at office space, so things are good. Wow, what's up with you, Brock?
I did not go to Oklahoma.
Well, no, it's
But-
Tullahoma in Tennessee.
Oh gosh, no.
No, I just
We're
say-
burning up over here. That's all I can say.
Where are you?
I'm in Arizona.
Yeah, but
Like literally,
Yeah.
it's definitely it's so hot. It's just crazy. So I
I
go out
don't
and
say it's a dry heat, but it doesn't matter, does it?
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, I do a lot of homeless outreach and I have a van that I put
Oh.
all this gear in and I can barely get into the van right now. It's like literally that hot.
72 degrees today was the high.
Where are you at, Todd?
Wisconsin, central Wisconsin. We
What'd
haven't
you
got
say was the high?
72.
Todd,
Yeah,
are you a Badger fan?
Oh, yeah.
So you don't recognize my last name?
Daryl Bevel.
It's my brother.
He's your brother?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's still coaching in the NFL?
Yeah, he's in Miami.
Quarterbacks coach or?
Yes.
Took a
You
surf.
can brag all you want, but we'll get on back on here in like January and February, and I can brag to you what our temperature is, and you can tell me yours.
Yeah.
That's why I moved to Tennessee when I did. I moved there because I wanted to live where the air did not hurt my face in January.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez.
I understand. And we still got snow. We got snow in Memphis. That's pretty exciting.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think Armando said he's going to be late and Mark is not going to be coming. So maybe we got everybody we need here. So let's go ahead and move forward. So tonight we're going to be talking about paperwork, scope of practice, reimbursement models, and just kind of diving into that. So this will be an open conversation because this will be pretty dry material, especially some of it. So, feel free to jump in. We'll have some case scenarios, different things like that going on. But ultimately, the learning is we want to learn a little bit about the reimbursement, you know, what is the trends in health coaching? And then, yeah, we'll figure it out as we go. So reimbursement model. So health coaching evolves nationally. I'm sure that these numbers are probably out of date because we had another exam. So I need to update this. I think we may have had 2 exams since this. But the field is growing drastically, right? We know this. Approved programs include academic degrees and certificate programs at undergrad levels to grad levels. I've been fortunate enough to work at the academic level, at the grad level, and continuing education level, and the undergrad level in developing coaching. And it continues to grow. This number, you know, it says 20% have clinical license, RNs, NPs, RDs, you know, but I'll say the people who also tend to fail the exam more or tend to be the people who have clinical license, or at least that's what I hear. So, you know, I think that's a real good number. But I think the bigger number is looking at this with 10,000 plus national board certified health coaches, it's still a growing field. And I know I say this a lot, but we are on the cutting edge of this field, right? Like right now, it's a national certification that is being reimbursed by Medicare, right? So that in itself is almost a really great thing. But then as it grows and we really have 100,000, right? We are, again are the experts in the field because we were the few that started it. But then they move towards state licensure. And once they move towards state licensure, then, you know, more and more insurance companies will start reimbursing for it. So we're on the ground level of where this could be. Let's see. Nope. 3 testing windows per year. I feel like that's 4 now, but you know, hopefully they'll be able to start opening the test up more. You know, that's one of the limitations right now in the field growing too, is you have to wait for that exam.
And I think we got a few years for to still be those pioneers before they move towards state licensures. The way it was explained to me is the state licensure process has got to be revenue neutral at least. And right now, with the number of coaches that are out there in the states, it costs the state more to administer the program, and they'd rather have their licensures bringing money into the state. So follow the money. That's once there's enough coaches that it'll start generating revenue for the coaches, they're going to dip their toes into it.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And not to say that you know, it has to have that state licensure. You know, it does cost money. It takes an infrastructure, so you'd have to have enough to pay for that to keep it going. So, you know, I do think that's a very good point. And moving on to this and thinking about that piece, right? So now we think about state licensure, but now we already have CPT codes that we can use to track everything, right? So they went into effect in January 2020. And then now they are approved to be able to bill through Medicare. So the codes that you use through Medicare, there's an assessment code, an individual, a group, and then they also have the social determinants of risk assessment. And that social determinants of risk assessment is there on a permanent basis. So if you're a health coach, you could bill Medicare for the social determinants of health risk assessment and an assessment in the same day and end up making a couple $100 just by working with Medicare for those 2 things. Let's see, does anybody have any questions about Medicare reimbursement?
And so Medicare just says we have to be certified through this test. It doesn't care about I don't have to be an LCSW or anything like that. It's just being, okay.
Actually, it's harder if you are an LCSW, it's harder to be credentialed as just a health coach. Like whenever I went through credentialing and we credentialed Peak Valor, it wouldn't allow me to even select it to be a health coach. Wouldn't even allow it to be my primary since I was an LCSW.
So it's a good thing I didn't do that. So, okay, good.
I wasn't saying it like that, but I just meant more like if you have that license, it's harder
Just
to pull it.
one thing to make me feel good about not doing it. That's good.
But I think that's important to know. So really getting credentialed, you know, nobody's really understanding how, and I'm pretty sure I've figured it out. And now hopefully we'll start being able to bill Medicare now. Oh,
And
You see what Abby said?
Abby's got a comment in the chat about
Do you want me
Uh,
to read it to you? You see it?
that's not accurate. It's actually approved in a telehealth. I can send you the link. Medicare will pay for it. And Medicare pays roughly, depends because it's also geographically located. But no, they approved health coaching and they expanded the physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, um, and those types of things. What would that be under a physician office? So what the physician office would have to do, and Abby, we could probably work together, but this is actually good. So really what it is whenever you, Abby, as a national board health and wellness coach, cannot be an independent licensed practitioner. So you cannot bill without being attached to an agency. And that's the reason why whenever I was telling Jennifer about my LCSW, me as an LCSW, I can be an independent licensed practitioner in Medicare. I can bill independently. I don't need an office to hold me, or not hold me down, but to be affiliated with. If you are not a LIP in the system, I forget what they call it now off the top of my head, but if you are a non-traditional practitioner, which is what a health coach would fall under, you have to be affiliated with your Medicare office. So I'll say if your doctor's office is not credentialed as an office under Medicare, then they couldn't pull you under that. But see, where we're as like Peak Valor Health and Fitness, we are credentialed as Peak Valor Health and Fitness. We are a credentialing, like we are a behavioral health clinic. So like we can pull health and wellness coaches under that and then be able to bill Medicare for it. Also, certain Medicaid programs you can bill under Medicaid. And one program that I can point to would be in Tennessee, right? HealthLink is a actually coaching type of service. And and Jennifer, I don't know if you know this, but HealthLink actually started in the VA, and that is actually a care model that is in the PACT model where it was initially piloted. And each PACT team had their own nurse, and they actually did the HealthLink process. And actually the researchers for HealthLink came to the VA to learn about that model through that. So most value-based care models come out of the VA. I say that because whenever we think about health coaching, that health link person, right? That person who is actually reaching out to the other people should be the health and wellness coach. So you could have health and wellness coaches billing targeted case management. And every Medicaid and Medicare program has targeted case management capabilities. And then you could be that health coach. Now, typically with that type of model, that model will be something like you have to touch that client one time and then you have to reach out to 3 other providers or something like that. You get 4 touches total over the course of whatever, right? And that's typically that Medicaid model and that targeted case management model. So I guess I say that, so those are other revenues, and those are going to be the other revenue approaches that we approach whenever we're going after these Medicaid models that are out there, like HealthLink and and even here in Colorado, they don't do things like Tennessee does in Colorado. They call their Medicaid program Medicaid. So I thought that was funny. Most states will call it something special like TennCare or anything. But anyway, so let me stop there. Abby, did that answer your question? And I would say if need be, we could definitely meet with your billing person and then we would be able to do it. And then I could show them your credentialing person and I could help them pull you underneath that. It's really relatively easy. Okay, any questions about that whole process? I'll add another piece to this is also health coaching you can now use as your health savings account. So there's a little bit of a setup for that. So if y'all have any questions about that, I'm still kind of diving into a lot of that paperwork, but it's relatively easy. You can actually have them fill out the paperwork and you just give them the documents and they can go send it on themselves. But there's an easier process to it than that, to where you could actually take their actual health savings account credit card and bill it that way. So that brings me to whenever you're really thinking about health coaching, another thing to think about is setting up multiple streams of revenue, right? That's ultimately what you have to do, and especially if you're going to be in private practice. I usually tell people to have 3 sets of revenue, right? Typically at all times. Because if you have 3 sets of revenue, if one kind of is faltering, let's say Medicare, not too many people's on Medicare or whatever, it's people on Medicare is not coming out, then you have 2 other streams of revenue to be able to help you out, right? So then that would be health savings accounts. And if I were you, I would try to set up contracts with people. And this is the way that you can do different types of contracts would be if, actually, I'll use the example from last class. There was a girl in the last class that wanted to work solely with maternity care, mainly postpartum depression. So I said, if you're somebody who has a target population like that, you go to an OBGYN and you create your practice, right? You start taking their clients on a regular basis. And then once you get full or close to full, you pretty much go back to them and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to take your clients, but I'll be able to keep certain slots open if you give me a contract, right? And then that's another way to be able to do it. The advantageous side of that to the provider is they can then go back and say that they need a higher reimbursement rate because they're looking at a different reimbursement model because they would probably be doing targeted case management and other things like that. So there's ways to be able to negotiate that with different types of providers, and especially providers with Medicare and Medicaid, if they check that they are a value-based care model place. And if they check that, then they would be more prone to be able to go towards a model like that. And you can look that up on the Medicare website. So whenever you really narrow down your area of expertise, whatever that would be, you know, you could really go in there and try to target it and be able to really do that. And then you go and you find a certain group of people and then you create that contract, and then now you have a contract in hand, right? So now you know you're always going to have a certain base level of money. Any questions about that before we move on? And it might be able that we can intertwine some of that stuff as we kind of go, but I feel like those are the 3 basic ways as a private practitioner to be able to grow your business and be able to maintain your business and sustain it. All right, let's move on. So really the new codes reflect all the research that's being done. The VA was really pioneers in this. If it wasn't for the VA, this wouldn't be happening. Another thing that I'll say with the reimbursement codes, they are temporary codes right now inside of Medicare. That's in that special place where PTs, like they expanded, like I said, the PT scope of practice and telehealth. You can only bill the CPT codes, Abby. I did fail to mention this. You can only bill them through telehealth services. So you can't do face-to-face coaching. It's only through telehealth, and it's only through that pocket and that little addendum that you can bill. So that does add a little bit different to that. But I just wanted to make sure we talked about that. And everything starts with temporary codes. So whenever I said those social determinants of health codes, they were temporary last year, and then this year they're final. So the idea would be that next year in the telehealth business that the CPT codes for health coaching would be final. But of course, a lot of that depends on research. And that's really what this points to, is all the research is being done. There is no doubt in my mind that Medicare will turn those into, if it's not next year, it'll be the year after, into permanent codes. Let's see, scope of practice. So qualified coaching professionals do not diagnose. I know we talk a lot about this, but we are not licensed professionals. We're going to show a video later that shows where health coaching can get a cease and desist order because you're doing something that is outside of your scope of practice. So be very careful whenever you're thinking about this. We don't diagnose, we don't give advice, right? We are not that person. And now that coaching is starting to have a name behind itself, or maybe not name, maybe I should say clout behind itself, that people are protecting that brand, right? So if you step outside that scope, it'll be coaches that will end up telling on you, right? It'll be other people that will be sending that cease and desist. Their role is really to help guide and be able to create a conversation that, hold on one second, my dog. Sorry about that, my dog. But you know, our ability to facilitate a conversation around values and mission and aspiration and purpose and readiness to change, other professionals don't really have time to do that. So that's kind of our ability to step in and show value to the or to the healthcare field.
And that, in the way that the coach goes about that, it can be, it's a pretty creative process. And, I'll just use an example, I'll just think of a referral that I had, and the doc comes up to me and he goes, I want you to work with Jim. His A1C's been creeping up. I want you to work with him on diet and exercise. He needs to lose some weight, get his A1C under control. So then as the coach, I sit him down, I tell him what coaching is all about. And then I say, your provider's concerned with your A1C. What's important to you? And, do that values exploration. It comes out that what this veteran's important to him. He was in his mid-50s. He had a grandkid that was getting ready to start Little League. And he used to be a really good ball player, and he wanted to play catch with his grandkid, show him some pointers and be able to be healthy like that. So the whole goal was to get him to where he could spend a couple hours with his grandkid, sit comfortably in bleachers and watch his grandkid play baseball. And so we did some work, he worked through some walking and progressively did some things. A few months later, he started changing his diet because he started feeling better. He went back to another primary care appointment 6 months later. Doc comes up to me, great job with Jim. His A1C dropped 1.5 and he's lost 25 pounds. And I just smile. That's all right. But that's the way that we work with those shared medical goals, or we're able to link the values driven change, because he didn't change because the doctor told him that he needed to do anything. He figured out why he wanted to and what he wanted to do. And it had that impact on his health.
That's right. I mean, that's really the value, is connecting everything together. And the alignment is what really health coaches focus on, that alignment to their mission, their values. But here we talk about coaching services can be flexibly delivered, right? It can be a standalone service. It can be combined with disease and lifestyle education. You can see it in skills training programs. But what I'll say is, a lot of times what you see in the field right now is you see a bunch of people in private practice, and then you see people who work typically in a managed care organization or a doctor's offices here and there. And ultimately it's either a service that's either a la carte service, like somebody wants this service and that's kind of the only people that they're advertising to. But typically, if you work for a managed care organization, that is going to be very much a targeted thing, right? It'll be that you will, maybe be cold calling patients that have diabetes, right? And things like that if you work for an organization. And, whenever we really think about that, and I think we talk about it later, but inside the scope of practice, that's something that if you're going to work for an agency, that you got to think about is doing coaching. You might be cold calling a lot of patients, doing different things. And
another example of that too, Charlie, is I got a coach that they're getting ready to write the program up, but they're piloting a diabetes management / coaching group, and it's co-facilitated. You got the diabetes educator that does a half hour around, they got a curriculum around a bullet, and then there's 30 minutes of coaching around goals and things specifically related to that. And it's working out pretty good. And I think once we pull the data, it's going to be a pretty successful approach.
I mean, I think incorporating coaching into anything. And I know one time, you can always think of coaching in so many different ways. And one thing that and I don't know if it ever took off, but right as I was leaving the VA, we tried to implement a group coaching practice with people that were cancer survivors. And then we would end up implementing their, I don't know if people know this. If you have cancer, there's so many follow-ups that you have to do right after you have cancer, especially even after, I think 5 years, it starts, trickling a little bit further, but there's a lot of exams and depending on the cancer and different things. So what we did was we wanted to have same concept with somebody would come in that knew, their cancer treatments, to say, hey, did you do your follow-up, blah, 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 blah. Hey, did you get this done? And then go into the coaching process, right? And then be able to have that education there. Because a lot of times the follow-ups are missed, and then that's how sometimes, things aren't caught, and then cancer comes back. So the idea was to prevent the cancer from coming back, or catch it early enough to where, they wouldn't have it again. So anyway, I think there's so many different ways to look at those possibilities, and to even think about doing it even with different populations. And here kind of segues right into it is, most coaches in private practice, they start with a target population, right? That's a population that they know. And I know for those who are in the course, know that that comes with a price sometimes, right? If you pick a target population and it's a population that is near and dear to your heart, that you may have lived, breathed, and been a part of that population, sometimes that causes transference, right? That causes issues. It can really burn you out a lot faster. So it's kind of catch-22. You know the population, you want to jump into it, but it can also burn you out. Also, starting with that business plan. There's so many ways to be able to develop that business plan. We can help you if you really want to get into that, and we can kind of guide you in that direction. There's so many resources out there, from the Small Business Administration to different areas. Starting as an employee for a company first to build your volume and experience, and then take your client base. That's another way to build your private practice. A lot of folks do things like this, but go somewhere, start building it up. And the way that I view this model, I tell people this model, and hopefully this isn't offensive if anybody's a hairstylist out there, but that's the hairstylist model, right? You go and you start working at super clips or whatever, and then you kind of build a client base, and then you go open up your own shop, right? And do things like that. Ultimately, it's that same type model for a coach.
And I even know coaches at the VA that have private practices, but they target separate demographics.
That's a good point. Talk about, trying to be diversified and not be stuck with one population, and creating less burnout, or maybe more burnout because you're working off. But some may do a combination of individual and group coaching. So there are platforms out there to where you can coach people through writing. I want to say Hinge Health does it. You can coach people and you never actually have to meet with one person. You could be talking to multiple different clients at the same time. Sometimes they have it set up to where you can only text with one client at a time, to where like you have this time dedicated, and that you and the client are texting back and forth during that 30-minute window. Other programs have it set up to where you could just be messaging back and forth all day long. But there's multiple programs that are out there that's this way. And you can also have programs in your own system. Like if you were in private practice, there's programs out there that you can even set that up with your own client base. You wouldn't have to be a part of anybody, and you could still do the texting and writing and those types of things. If you plan on being an entrepreneur, then you better get comfortable with social media, right? At the end of the day, understand marketing and the biggest client base and where you'll be. If you're going to do business coaching and you're starting a business, then LinkedIn's going to be your place, right? If you are, trying to think of any, that just threw me off, but trying to think, Instagram is the largest. Actually, Instagram isn't the largest. YouTube is the largest place that you can advertise your business. That is the largest place. YouTube is number one. Instagram is number two. I want to say Facebook, probably Meta, probably all falls into number two, but Facebook is for family and friends, for early adopters. So if you got an early adopter and you're trying to get out there, Facebook is the place to do it, right? Instagram is for ongoing support. But if you narrow down a niche and you really want to focus on, let's say, business coaching, then you can really do that through LinkedIn. And I can even show you all how you can really narrow down a population inside of LinkedIn, if that would be advantageous later, if that's something y'all would want to learn. But you can really narrow down the population in LinkedIn, and then you can create different types of pages and advertising that you can geographically locate or have a commonality between them all. And LinkedIn is actually a very good place to advertise. There are pay models that include the session length, right? So a lot of times a big thing is bundle payments. A lot of people like bundle payments because you get money up front. Sometimes you can have money up front and ongoing payments. Just kind of depend on the models that you want to be a part of. I would say there's limitations to this model, paying as you go versus this is creating a subscription model. You get more money, but it takes a whole lot more effort, right? You can get somebody to come in for one session, but you can't get somebody to commit to a bundle of $1,000 versus coming in for $75 or whatever your payments would be. There are locations where free volunteer services are offered. You know, I will say I'll volunteer my time in places. One place that that you can always typically get, I would say volunteer places that make sense towards your business as well, right? And I don't mean that to kind of, sell your soul to go volunteer somewhere. I mean it more like, it should be all aligned in the things that you do so you can gain business by volunteering in other places. All right. So if you're not in private practice, here goes some of the places that you can work out, right? Clinical practices and healthcare systems. The VA is a place, I think right now they're the largest employer for health coaches, even though they probably don't call them health coaches. But
The new official name is Health and Wellness Coaches.
Yep, the new official name. So it just came out, I want to say, just a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
May 22nd.
May 22nd. So right now, the VA has come out with qualification standards. And it is very important to think about that, right? Because like I said, the VA was the one who paved the way for the CPT codes. We would not be able to reimburse for Medicare, and we wouldn't be able to reimburse or get health savings accounts if it wasn't for the VA. So we have to watch the VA as we are progressing in this field, because if they change something, and one thing, that me and Todd was talking about beforehand was they were talking about putting into the scope of practice that health coaches could not do like Tai Chi, mindfulness, yoga, maybe more movement-based practices. And to me, as a coach on the outside, watching that happen in the VA, I would view that as a very large threat because they have paved the way for so many things. Go ahead,
Hey,
Brian.
Charlie, let me ask you a question on that. Do you have to work in the VA? Do you have to be a veteran?
No.
Or they take people outside?
Yep. I
And-
have 9 coaches that work for me. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 are veterans.
Now I'll
Do they
say,
have better luck when you're getting to the coaching aspect of it?
With the new qualification standards and the way they're written, the veteran aspect of it is, I think, diminished a little. Because now as someone that's a hiring authority, I can't hire someone knowing that I can send them to training and train them up and have this time to invest in them. I have to hire someone pre-trained. So it's the veteran aspect still gets people hiring preferential points within the VA, but it's with this new qualification standard, it's going to be coming down. Once you guys finish this course and you got a certificate with a little blue emblem, you'd be eligible to apply.
Cool.
so I'll say to that, what Todd's talking about before, the VA has multiple different channels that a job can be in. One channel that it was in before May 22nd, 2024, was that you could not direct hire people unless they were in some special category. Now, as long as they have that certification, you can pretty much direct hire them. I mean, you'll still have to post a job and do other things, but if you had somebody at hand and you can almost say that you can hire this person, it's a little bit easier to hire people now. Change it into this, and I think it's probably a great thing for the profession. So, but again, we need to watch what they're doing, because if they were to slide something like that into the scope of practice inside of the VA, it is no doubt in my mind that that would be the standard for the field. So, and then if they say that you can't do mindfulness practices. Well, let's just say mindful movement. Mindful movement should be a part of everybody's scope of practice because you can do breathing techniques and things like that. If somebody told me mindful movement was a part of my practice, then you wouldn't be able to do breathing techniques. You wouldn't be able to do, belly, be able to do anything like that, right? Because that's a mindful movement that would put you at risk. So I think those are things to keep in mind, and the reason why, even if you don't want to work at the VA, there's a reason why you should still keep an eye on the VA and the things that they're doing. Let's go. So now other places, population health networks. I think we already mentioned that. You could work with CVS. You could work with, I think I've seen that was another job that posted for a health coach with CVS. They tend to be the folks that are going to be cold calling and trying to get a patient population. And there's nothing wrong with the cold calling approach. I think that's going to be something that health coaching is going to have to kind of get used to. I think that's going to be kind of a model that will happen. Hopefully, especially if you work in a system, but hopefully not. It's a big waste of time. It's a morale suck whenever you do it.
I've done it.
Yeah, actually,
And,
go ahead.
and the way it works, I mean, like, cause I was assigned to three providers. I had three different providers. Each one of them had a panel of patient, 850 to 1,200 patients on a panel. So I had almost 3,000 different people on a list. And the way I would do it is I just look at the upcoming appointments that provider had the next week, make a call. Hey, I'm Todd Riley with the VA. I'm a health and wellness coach, something new the VA is offering. You got 5 minutes and let me explain. I can give you a brief understanding. And, 50% would say no at that point.
Right.
Then the 50% would actually listen. And then, of that 25%, it turn into a 15-minute call. And then probably out of that 25% that turn into 15-minute call, I get 50% of those that actually come in for an appointment. And I had to do these calls to get my panel up to where I'm busy enough productivity wise for roughly 3 to 4 months. But it sucks. It takes time, but it gets there, and you do have an impact on the people that actually do come in.
I mean, I think that's the best way of looking at it, is the impact that you have. But I will say, I did not have to do that. I was the one who was, I guess, telling folks that they had to do that, and I got a lot of backlash from it. But I'll say some of the great things that we did that I hope is still in place today is we also did that with transitioning veterans. And then whenever they would come out of warrior transition units or active duty and they were in our area, so that's where it was, in my opinion, another powerful place to be able to do it. You narrowed down a target population to where we said, okay, it's every person transitioning into this area, we're going to give them a call.
And we're doing it now with the PACT Act.
Oh, okay, that's even better. See, so
I
now
don't have coaches calling. I got my partners doing it, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I think there's value in it. It's just sometimes whenever you call people, and like Todd said, it's only 10% of people, 25% of people that will, that you'll get a client from, that can be pretty defeating sometimes. So kind of getting into that mindset, if you're going into a job like that, to know you're going to be cold calling people and kind of talking to them and trying to get your clients that way. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a mindset. People don't go into coaching thinking that's going to be something they're going to do, and ultimately a lot of times that's
that
kind of,
mindset part is huge because I dread the calls. You get cussed out by one person. Why are you calling me? I don't want. And then you dread every call, and 99.98% of them are rather pleasant calls. But
right.
you still get that little twist. I don't want to do this.
That's right. It's that negative, it's that gremlin in the back of your head. Um, let's see, corporations with employee health initiatives. This is another one that is a rapidly growing thing. The VA is another pioneer in this. They have chief well-being officer positions that they're trying to implement and roll out. At the Wellness Effect, we have a chief well-being officer training. But more importantly, I think the biggest thing to think about here is whenever you move into this role, you'd move more from a individual practitioner to more of a macro practitioner, meaning that you would look at a more of a global lens of the organization. So maybe you might do some cold calling if you were a part of that. Maybe that would be part of it. But I think the bigger piece would be, how can you make the employee health system better? How can you make employees healthier? And then coming up with plans around that, maybe even doing some of that targeted piece and things like that.
And a lot of people, a lot of institutions, the bottom line is burnout is one of their highest costs, because it costs X number of dollars to recruit and replace employees and everything like that. And burnout is a big cost. And a lot of those employee health initiatives are focused on that burnout reduction.
I agree. And, you know, burnout is a huge thing, especially in the healthcare profession right now. So we should be focused on it. Okay, so assessing health coaching services. Individual and group sessions can be flexibly combined. There's so many different ways to do it here. Physically face-to-face, real time, right? You can do audio, you can do the real-time synchronous audio. I actually coach a few clients right now that I have never seen over the phone, or like through video conferencing, only through phone. And then actually I had a couple other clients that I've only texted with, right? So it's another thing, like, use technology to your advantages. And also these approaches help meet patients where they are, right? Because if they don't feel like they can handle a 30-minute phone call and all they need to do is to be able to text back and forth with somebody, it gives them that option. And it helps really be able to do that. But I'll say there's also limitations with that, right? Whenever you use words or text messaging, there's a lot of things that can be misinterpreted. So I tend to, whenever you have your coaching agreement, to have that written into your coaching agreement to say, know that I have the best intentions, or something along those lines. If we use written words or written communication, know that sometimes inflation can be part of that, right? Or be missed in that.
And the other thing I just want to throw in, the face-to-face modality, we spend a lot of time talking about that in the coaching course. But when you get into the audio with the visual, like the virtual platforms and even the telephone, a lot of things are still very important. Coaching is about creating that safe space and everything. You want to be aware of what your background is when you appear on video. You want to be aware of what the background noise is if you're on a phone conversation, if somebody's on speakerphone. I mean, one of the things that caught me off guard is that I had a virtual, and I got behind me on my shelf, I got my drill sergeant hat and a helmet and an American flag. And believe it or not, that was a veteran found some of that stuff triggering, and to be able to blur your background if you have different things is important. And the same thing, like making sure you're centered in your screen, you're able to get eye contact and all that other stuff for these other platforms are important to meet those client needs and meet the client where they're at.
That's right. And then, I think moving into that coaching agreement too, and being flexible in the way that you're going to communicate with your clients and spelling those things out. There's so many different ways, right? So establishing a professional coaching relationship, outline services that you're going to provide, right? Parties confirm responsibilities and contract terms, and then confirms understanding and agreement by both parties. I was going to show two coaching agreements. Let me see.
All this front loading,
Huh?
all this front loading, getting all that administrative, that logistics stuff's right out in the open, putting your cards on the table.
That's right. Description of the coaching process, the rights, roles, and responsibilities of both you and the client, what you expect from them, your scope of practice, right? I tell people, and especially in the state of Colorado, so if people are in Colorado, know your state, because in Colorado, you better have your certificate number written on there on your coaching thing, because if you don't give them that in the state of Colorado, that is a violation if you don't actually give them your actual certification number. Because you have to have your license number on there, your scope of practice. And now what I don't know in Colorado is as a therapist, I have to have where I was educated. I have to have everything written down whenever I have my agreement for therapy. In coaching, I would imagine it's going to be the same thing. They're going to say, where were you trained? Blah, blah, blah. They're going to want to know everything, but they hadn't come out with that yet. But know your state regulations, because state can still guide it, even though it's a national certification and things like that. So know your state. Terms and conditions, right? You would have that in there.
Hey, Charlie, sorry, I was muted. I was trying to get undone. So how would we check this? Like with, say I'm in Arizona, is there like a licensing agency that's over this? Is it the health department, or how do we find it?
That's what I would say is I would call your state health department, or not your state health department, state licensure board. And they have a general licensure board that is over all the licensure boards. That's the one you would want to call, because they wouldn't have a license for this. And then what you would want to ask them is, what are the requirements when working with patients in the state of Arizona? And then they would say, oh, you can go to this website, or they might even say it. They'll say, hey, really, it's nothing besides a confidentiality agreement. You just got to tell them HIPAA. You're right. They might say something general. A lot of states don't have, Colorado. I'm trying to think if Arizona would be considered one of those, but Colorado, as far as like giving rights to patients and things like that, is kind of forward thinking state. So, they kind of err on that side of giving more information
Yeah,
versus.
we're in Arizona. We can carry guns to our sessions, so it's okay.
That's right. That's right. So I don't know if Arizona would be that way or not, but so theirs might be more general, like in Tennessee, and I'm also licensed in Minnesota. Those two states don't require me to provide that much information. Right. So, but it is important to know, because, we'll show a video later that kind of talks about that scope of practice and getting burned. But let me stop sharing and then just show these two that I have over here. I just Googled health coaching agreements. So you all would be able to find these anywhere. Let me take these off here. So you can literally just Google them if you're trying to find some and do that. Here goes one. They have it on their website, which I am good. I think that would be a great place to keep it. If you're in private practice as a health coach, you could have your health coaching agreement on your website, right? Instead of having it over and over again. And in here, they're delighted to meet you. They kind of have this agreement. They have it to where you can take it, put the client's name in, print it. They have who they are, kind of what they kind of offer, what they're going to be bringing. And then down here, fees, payments, right? They have the entire package. They have gift certificates, sliding scale, donations, booking sessions, cancellations. They kind of just name everything right here. And, I feel like this is a pretty decent one. But here goes another one, Semper Wellness, another one that I found. They have it on their website as well, but pretty similar. Here they actually have the coach-client relationship, which I think would be a critical thing to kind of call out, right? To say this is going to be, the coach agrees to maintain this, the client is responsible for this, right? That you're going to show up and be here. So I kind of like having the client responsibilities laid out. Then they have their services, schedules, procedures, confidentiality. So another one. So, another good thing is whenever you all start to dive into this, there are resources out there that are open source. You can literally just Google them. Like literally, I just Googled, coaching agreements. And I think I put the National Board Certified Health Coaching Agreements, and then this people's will pop up. So, I'm not saying go in and directly steal people, because some of this stuff will be unique to you, right? And then if you go back to this one, this is pretty unique to what she's going to be providing and how she's going to do it. So, maybe some of these other ones down here might be something that you could just copy and paste, but, be mindful if you are going to somebody else's website and using their stuff, just make sure you're reading it and doing that. Everybody see the PowerPoint now?
Now,
Okay. All right. So let me go back. Oh yeah, that was it. So sponsors and third parties. So contracting with third parties who is not the client. As a health coach you know, there's not too many people that would fall under that right now. Medicare would be one. So Medicare would be a payer. So they would have certain requirements that they're going to require to pay you to provide that service to their client. So ultimately, the client is not yours. The client is the insurance companies. So if you're going to take insurance, the clients are not yours. You still have a liability to those clients, but they're not your clients, right? So they're so you got to kind of clarify those roles whenever that happens. If they're going to pay for a service, they're going to have an expectation of that service, right? So, and then there's also going to be a limit to those expectations based on your scope of practice. So whenever you get those roles and responsibilities, whenever you get credentialed with Medicare, they provide you the details of how to bill your services. They provide you everything that you need, but you need to read that to make sure that it fits within your scope of practice. And the reason why I say that is I don't know if people understand how credentialing works. So maybe I should say that too. If you get credentialed through Medicare, Medicare does not do your credentialing, right? It is a third party that does your credentialing. They contract everything out. So it'll be a third party that is getting paid based on how many completed credentialing packets they get. So those credentialing packets are you to read. Remember that. If there is an error in that and you start practicing under that error, that is your error and your burden. Remember that, because you signed the contract. That 20-page document or whatever it is, whether you read it or not, you signed that contract. So you need to understand it. Other places would be employee sponsors, insurance companies, fitness centers, gyms, doctors' offices. You know, what are some other areas that you might be able to get a third party to reimburse you for client services?
Say that again.
What are some other places that you might be able to get third parties to reimburse you to provide coaching services to their clients?
I don't know, it may be a niche area, but anybody that's coaching a minor and parent is paying.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that brings up another point, and a slippery slope is know your state's consent for treatment, right? Consent for treatment can vary from state to state to state. And you know, in Colorado, the consent for treatment is actually 12 years old. So, you know, other states it's 16, some states it's all the way to 18. So, you know your state for that too, especially if you're going to work with minors. Protect yourself whenever it comes to that for sure, because if you were to talk to a parent who is paying for a service about a client issue, that could end up being a HIPAA violation if that patient is over a certain age, even though they paid for the service. But the best way around that is to get a release of information signed for the parent every single time if you're dealing with them, and they're willing to all sign it. But you know, there's ways around it, but you got to know your state, and then you can go around that. That's a great point. You know, another thing I would say would also be, you know, fraternity houses who pay for coaches to be there, right? There's another place that you just got to see it. But you know, I mean, honestly, that was a joke, but I mean, there's honestly places that have coaches inside of them that you might not even ever think about, right? And that's one that I never would have thought about until what good looks like, and us started partnering. So.
And they had fraternity houses you were working with?
Yeah, that's what he works. So I guess actually, I guess I should let Brock say it. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do. I work with a wellness company where we work within the universities, and we just with the fraternities work with the men who are there. So like I work at Arizona State at Sigma Alpha Epsilon. And I
Yeah,
have
SAE. Yeah.
SAE have 155 guys that I get to work with. So we have them all over.
And they're open to it and it goes well?
You know what's cool is Arizona State's awesome because we talk wellness, like we have wellness companies all over Arizona, right? It's a big thing. But now we have other coaches that are at like Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, and they're
SEC
it's a
leading
little
the
different.
way.
What's that?
SEC leading the way.
Yeah, man, they're
Everywhere.
we're
Like
the
they
only
just
one
did the
out
World
west.
Series. Okay, sorry.
Stop it. We're the only one out west, so yeah.
That's interesting because I could see sororities because I mean I was in one and I could see the girls. I mean, and I could see the guys maybe needing it to help them not over drink or something. But okay, it's interesting to know. So that's good to know. Thanks.
No,
Sorry
it's
to
it's a
derail.
niche if anybody's thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it is. And then you think about that population, and Jennifer hit on something, is binge drinking, right? With that population is huge. You know, there's other things that you would need to be culturally sensitive to, right? It's almost like a culture within a subculture. So now you have a melting pot of different cultures going into a university that has, you know, their own unique approaches. And then now they're being lumped into college students, right? And then now the college students themselves, they have, you know, different types of stress and different types of things that they do. So
FOMO. Jennifer, you wouldn't believe it, but that's like one of the biggest things that they struggle with. Getting to class, waking up in the morning, they're like, "What am I gonna miss?"
I
So,
get that. Oh, I know.
oh,
I totally
dude,
get it. Yeah. So I could
it's
see it on
crazy.
the other side too with the girls, like just with, you know, appearances and stuff and how much pressure we put on our sorority girls to be pretty, or our girls. So, okay, that's just interesting. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's just getting me thinking.
no, you're
especially
good.
in a sorority, you know, it's funny. My oldest daughter is in a sorority as well, and you know, it's crazy the pressure that they are put under just to be in a sorority. It's
Yeah, it's a lot.
mind-boggling. And the worst part about it is you pay for the experience.
It is. But it's wonderful. I'm still friends 40 years later with people, so it's not all bad. Okay, but anyway.
All that too, but you know, I do find it, you know, disheartening too. All right, so let's jump into some case studies. So here we have a third-party case study. So company X has hired Haley to coach employees who elect to participate in the company's well-being program. To receive credit on their insurance premium, employees must complete 2 coaching sessions with Haley. During the first sessions, employees will identify a physical health goal that can be completed within 6 months. During the second session, 6 months later, employees must be able to report that they made progress on their goal. So, man, I don't even know what to say about this. So, whenever we think about this, what might be a way to arrange the agreement so that the coach can have more autonomy with their clients and be less involved with their clients' eligibility for credit on their health insurance premium? So this is always the catch-22, right? Is whenever there is an incentive for them to come, they show up and don't accomplish anything, right? They're not really there. You think about the stages of change, they're showing up to quit smoking. Let's use this as a quit smoking program, right? And then they have to show up for those 2 coaching sessions to get their $50 off their premium, right? Or whatever it is, right? And they got to show up to do that. You know, how could you write a coaching agreement in a way that could help you, you know, have more autonomy in that situation with those clients? And I think those are things to start thinking about. Because ultimately, you as a health coach in this scenario, it puts Haley in this scenario in charge of whether people receive a financial incentive, right? Would you want to be in that place as a health coach? Ultimately, in my opinion, that would be prescribing something, right? That would be, you know, and you don't want to really think about that is how can you not be that person that determines if somebody is going to be financially rewarded for showing up to your appointments? I don't know how to really word it, but you know, you can make sure the coaching agreement and eligibility between the employees and their employer, and not Haley and the employees, right? So you kind of put that buffer between you and them. You make them be the ones to determine all of that and whether they show up. And you know, this is another thing, is always work with a lawyer sometimes on these types of things too, because a lawyer will be able to word that in a way that you need to. But you should never be the determining factor for anything for your client base at all, right? There should always be a buffer between you and that client if there's a third party paying.
And from my mind, from the coach perspective, I mean, I may be willing to write something in there telling the client that I will report that you attended 2 sessions. You are responsible to report any progress and everything that is goal. But then you got two parties that you got to make that agreement with. The person paying for it's got to agree that that's acceptable to them, that that's all you're going to report is whether they showed up or not. And then the client's got to agree that, okay, that you're willing to do that, because really it comes down to CYA protecting yourself in this situation.
That's right. And definitely keep in mind the liability. Whenever you are working with clients and something is out of your control when working with those clients, you need to verify that with the client. And if you don't want to, who determines what made progress is? It could be that they moved a level on the, I think you would definitely need that spelled out, right? Is who determines what made, progress is very vague, right? And from a coach standpoint, we're a client-centered perspective. So their progress is really based on them at the end of the day, too. So we view progress way differently than that organization, insurance company, or whoever that third-party payer is going to be. We are going to view it way differently. The insurance company is probably going to be viewing it as a value dollar base, whereas we're viewing it as a client-centered approach. So you need to be able to spell those types of things out.
And the traditional medical model is driven by the dollars, and we're coming at this approach that doesn't necessarily fit some of the metrics and some of the things that the traditional medical model has attached to it. There's quite the conundrum there at times.
I agree.
Question real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, because we know this is pretty much an extrinsic motivation, right? It's something that's being out there as a motivation. Is there any way in, or that you guys may know, like let's say this was the scenario as it is, where you can have them meet multiple times instead, and then in each multiple time that's documented, then they're getting a certain amount of the discount. So let's say it was $50 of discount, and they meet 10 times, then it's going to be $5 discounts on each. And if they missed a couple of them, then they don't get the full discount, but they get a discount. And then that way even though it's an extrinsic motivation, which is usually really hard to get that change because it's something that you're just doing for the money. But as they're meeting more often, wouldn't that create maybe a little bit more chance of them changing, like the opportunity to provide that change?
And
I
I
don't know if
say,
that's something you can negotiate, but I'm just wondering.
yes, Armando, and I think you're thinking on the right path, but again, you got this third party payer. What are they willing to pay? What are they willing to agree to? And then you got your clients. You understand, you showing an understanding of the coaching process and how how people move through the stages of change, and then you being able to articulate that to a third party payer when they say they get 2 sessions in this, and you're saying, well, success would be greater this for this and this reason. You may be able to negotiate something like that.
Okay, got it.
I would say absolutely. And I think that's the way to kind of mitigate it, right? Is one of the mitigation strategies to kind of have a little bit more control over it is to pitch that back to them. Because anytime you're creating these contracts, it's probably going to be a back and forth contract, especially with employers and things like that. With insurance, not so much. But typically with an employer or something like that, you'll have more back and forth to say, wait a minute, that makes no sense, right? We got to think. And then that's whenever you can use your expertise to say, hey, whenever you think about the stages of change, these people are going to have no stake in the game and they're just going to be showing up, and it's just going to be a check on the box for 80% of the people. We could really make it 80% of the people more impactful if we did it, and then throw out your way, Armando, right? And I think that's the negotiation piece whenever you're working with those third-party payers. Scope of practice, right? Assessing fit, managing dual roles, sharing information and resources, and the future of regulation. We have to be clear about our scope of practice, and we have to fight for our scope of practice. And those are things that we really need to remember. But assessing for coaching fit, assessing clients who are not candidates for coaching. This is always something that I argue back all the time. I have never met a person that was not really ready to be coached. And we have implemented it in a healthcare setting, and I feel strongly that everybody has an opportunity to be coached, and it can be complemented with any type of care that they're receiving. Go ahead, Todd.
I've met one, but he was a narcissistic, all kinds of problems, and he just didn't fit. But the other thing too is what Charlie said, the VA, and this is Todd talking, you're not going to read this anywhere. The VA is a healthcare system that incentivizes illness,
That's right.
and we coach wellness. We are polar opposite. There's financial incentives for veterans not to get well, and we coach wellness, and it works in that system. So anybody can be coached. It is, again, I fully agree with that.
I agree too. And I think everybody can be coached, but I do think assessing for it. Now, I will say if you're in private practice and you have narrowed down who you coach, then maybe that's an opportunity for you to say, assessing them to say, hey, we'll use Brock's analogy. If they don't fit into this fraternity, that they're not one of those 144 people, then that's what I'm assessing for. So ultimately, there are other ways that you can assess to narrow down your population, but I think that's a little bit different than what we're kind of talking about here. Have needs outside the scope of coaching. And what I would say, if they have needs outside of the scope of coaching, that's whenever you really build your bench. I think it was last week or the week before we talked about when and how to refer. Here you have to build your bench on who you're going to refer to, and you have to have that readily available. But just because they don't fit what you can do doesn't mean you give up and then you just, pass them on. They can still be coached that entire process, right? Because they might still need coaching services to know, and some of those things, even those soft skills that Brock was even talking about, showing up to class, to, those types of things would be some of the things that you could coach around while they're getting their mental health counseling or whatever else is going on that you referred them to. Are better served by another coach. Now, I think this is one that is decent and can definitely, if you are not a good fit with somebody, and I don't really know of any that stands off the top of my head, but if you don't want to work with a certain population, you need to know that if you have a certain bias within that. I know we talked about cognitive bias a couple sessions ago too, right? Everybody has cognitive bias, if there's a reason why that's not fitting, but it could also be a genuine thing of countertransference, right? You show up and you absolutely, let's say you were a victim of domestic violence, and then the person that you're trying to coach is an offender of domestic violence, right? And that person triggers you every time you show up. That's probably somebody that you don't need to coach, right? And that would be somebody that you might want to refer on to somebody else if you're getting physical reactions.
Hey, Charlie, sorry, Todd, go ahead, brother.
I was just going to say, another incident is I think it's our role as the coach too, to us, to help assess that fit. And I'll just use an example. I'm coaching in the VA. Military sexual trauma is a real thing. A lot of the perpetrators of military sexual trauma look like me. I got to be able to read that client. If I know they experience MST, they may say they're okay to be coached by me, but I have to be able to make a professional judgment. Is this client better served by another coach?
That's right.
My question kind of goes with that. Sorry, Charlie, I didn't mean to interrupt, man. We need that hand thing that goes up, right?
You got it.
Oh, I do. Sorry about that. I don't think I know how to use it.
You're good.
What do you find? Anyways, there you go. My question is, sometimes we don't know that until after we've signed this agreement, right? Then all of a sudden we start diving in and this trauma starts coming up. And I guess my question is, how do you transfer? How do you you got to be honest with Mike. Hey, I can't coach you. I know there's a very eloquent way to say it, but how do you have to find another coach for them? Do you have to, you know what I'm saying? Do you have to pass it off, or do you just get them to find the coach?
I would not leave it on them. And I think, I don't know if it specifically says that in the code of ethics or in our scope of practice in the national board, but I would imagine it's ethical that you have to always find somebody. If we didn't have it in the scope of, or in ethics, we should have it in ethics to say you can't leave them hanging, and you know, because that would be a sense of rejection to that patient. But what I would also say is I would have that spelled out in your coaching agreement. If at any particular time in this relationship, if you or I feel like we need to back out of this relationship, and you know, I'd point to that sometimes to say, you know, sometimes we may not know, and you could even have the conversation to say, hey, you know, I have my own issues, and you know, sometimes I might be the one that needs to back out of this relationship, and I want you to know that it's not you. That's going to be the case. It's going to be my issues with kind of what's going on.
It's not
And
you, it's me.
it's not you, it's me. That's right.
I think we've all heard that before, Todd.
Not me. It's always them.
um, but I do think that's important to kind of, you know, that's a good point. Is like I would most certainly say, and I think that's also to help build your bench. You know, a lot of times, I think I said it before, is in private practice, you're on an island, right? And if you're not out there networking, if you're not out there talking to other coaches, and you run into that problem, what are you going to do? You're going to feel like you're going to have to keep seeing that patient that you're having, you know, some type of reaction to that you probably shouldn't be coaching, right? And then that transference is just going to continue to get worse, and you're going to increase burnout. So, you know, find other coaches, you know, find coaches that don't look and sound like you and all that type of stuff, and have them on your bench. Because I think it's very important to have that, because it's going to come up. You know, it might not come up all the time. It might be once in a blue moon, but it's going to come up. Let's see. Ugh. So, man, I'm messing this all up. So, take an appropriate action. So, here, seek professional guidance, right? Mentor, coach, or other professionals. You know, the bad thing about the coaching profession, and you'll probably hear me talk about this, is we don't do enough supervision as a coaching field. You know, for me to be a social worker, I had to do 3,000 hours, but then I had to do, I think it's 100 or 200 supervised hours with another licensed clinical social worker. I wish we had, maybe not that. It doesn't, I don't know if it would need to be that robust, but I wish we had more time to where were able to build a relationship with a mentor. Because I think that's important in the field to be able to bounce ideas off of. So, you know, kind of back to, you know, Brock saying, how am I going to get rid of this person? Well, there's an opportunity to be like, hey, go back to your coach or your mentor and be like, yo, every time I see Todd, I physically get upset in my stomach. I just, you know, I don't want to see him anymore, and I don't know what to do, right? And then you'll be able to bounce that off somebody, and use professional settings
And
or professional college or organizations. Sorry.
and that's critical to it. And you know, like Charlie said, other professions call it clinical supervision. You got case staffing, peer consultation. Just in coaching, we latched on to that mentor because it's about being able to grow that skill set and having somebody that you trust. But it's critical to grow as coaches. And, you know, especially when you guys finish and you're out there coaching, I got my certificate, I can coach. And I'm going to be the first one to, I mean, I went out and I started coaching and got my certificate. And then I started teaching and I realized all the things I was jacking up. So I'm just being honest. I mean, it was brand new profession and things like that, you know, that this creeping out of this coach of practice, getting into case management, delving into other areas, but having that mentor, somebody that you can go to now that we're this growing profession, is going to be critical for continued growth. And, you know, you'll go through that role and eventually you'll be that mentor for somebody.
I mean, again, you know, I know I keep saying it, but we are going to be the leaders in this field. It's just a matter of time, right? There's only 10,000 people literally in the entire United States that is in this field right now. I should say that is certified. I shouldn't say in this field, that is certified right now. So again, you know, y'all, if y'all are educators or want to be educators, there's probably going to be many opportunities for that to happen at many different levels to everything. I think, you know, anyway, I think it's a great opportunity. Suspend or terminate the coaching relationship. In my opinion, I would say it is unethical to just drop somebody without a plan. Again, I don't know if it says that in the national board in their documents, but if it doesn't, again, I feel like that would be shame on you, right? If you just drop somebody off and say, hey, we're done, and then they go out and hurt themselves or hurt somebody else or do something, that could be a pretty devastating thing. Refer a client to another coach or resource. I think that ultimately that's the main goal, is to get them into somebody else's hands.
I got a question, Charlie. On that suspend or terminate coaching relationships, and my question is because I don't fully understand it in the private sector, because in the VA, coaches are mandated reporters. If a coach is, I understand if a coach has a higher level licensure, they're mandated to report at their highest level licensure for certain things.
Right.
If they're practicing under somebody else's licensure, they're probably mandated to report at that licensure level. But if
Right.
I'm just a coach and I hang up a shingle and all it has is my NIBWIC certificate, nothing else, that suspend or terminate in certain states could probably get someone in legal trouble.
I mean, absolutely, it could. That's another great thought, is know your state, right? Know your state. We're going to show a video here in about 8 slides. We'll probably take a break before we show the video, but know your state, because your state is going to dictate all those things. Are you a mandatory reporter? Like I know in Colorado and Tennessee and I think a lot of states, you as being a civilian is a mandatory reporter. And I don't think people understand that I would say I don't think it's every state, but I want to say about 70% of states, you are a mandatory reporter automatically. That means you in a profession, no matter what, you're a mandatory reporter. So if somebody's going to harm themselves or harm somebody else, you have to report it. Now, the other thing that gets sticky is child abuse, right? And elderly abuse. That is also dictated to a state as well. Like I said, in the state of Colorado, 12 is the age of consent for treatment. But, in other states, there's different types of consent at different levels and different ages and different things like that. You have to know all those things if you're going to be treating that population. And it's also I think 100% of states are mandatory reporters for child abuse and elderly abuse. So, know those types of laws. And I will say, though, if you terminate a client, there is a possibility that you could get in a lot of trouble without having that plan in probably a good amount of states, I'd imagine. All right, question. So let's see. It is your first coaching session with Victor. Victor wants to work on his relationship segments on a health compass. He says that he has social anxiety, but that he doesn't need counseling. He wants more friends, but he avoids interacting with people because he is afraid. They're afraid that they won't let him. What is your next best step? Keep coaching him, or A, keep coaching him and watch for signs of mental health problems. B, ask Victor how he envisions coaching will be helpful to him. C, inform Victor that you are not qualified to work with his issues of social anxiety. D, seek guidance about Victor's issues from mental health professionals. So this could be an exam question right here. This is a good example of an exam question. What would be your next step? So what would you all say?
I would say either A or B, maybe.
A or B?
And that's probably not an option at the test. Keep coaching him and watch for signs of mental health problems. Ask Victor how he envisions coaching will be helpful. I don't know. Maybe A?
So keep coaching him and watch for signs of mental health problems.
Because I feel like
How
we're
about D?
qualified.
You're going B, Brock?
D.
Ask Victor how he
No,
envisions.
D, as in David.
Oh, you're going D. Seek guidance about Victor's issue from a mental health professional. So I'll say the answer is B. Ask Victor how he envisions coaching will help him, because that's ultimately what we're
I
doing.
didn't say that. Probably one of them. But
Right,
And-
we're coaching.
I was close.
The day.
I was the
And that's
furthest
where
off.
what Charlie showed you was a very good exam question,
Yes.
because it asked specifically your next best step. you're in the session, your next best step. So D, that's a good step. I would do that. That's that mentorship, that consultation piece, but that's not the next step.
I would say to add that though, what would make that question right for D, Brock, would be if they said, what would you do after this session? Then that would make D right, right? And they could very well ask it in the exam just like that to throw you off. So whenever we talk about the exam itself, that's why I always tell people focus on how they ask the questions, right? Because that, I think that is another good one, right? Is just depending on how they change this very last sentence right there, right? What is your next best step, right? So,
Yeah, I'm that guy that doesn't read all the way through.
Abby nailed it.
What'd you say? Sorry.
Abby nailed it in the chat.
What'd you say? Oh man.
Abby answered it after we answered. Come on, girl.
All right. She was still typing. We'll give her credit. We got this. All right. So dual roles in coaching, right? We have to know dual roles. I am an LCSW. I'm also a certified yoga therapist. I'm also a health coach, right? So I have multiple different credentials, and those credentials sometimes can overlap, right? Especially my yoga therapist certification and health coaching. Those overlap more than I feel like the LCSW. The LCSW, I can take that hat off and be like, hey, I'm diagnosing, right? I feel like there's a clear distinguishing part to that. My dogs are getting very restless. I don't know if y'all hear them. But you can't hear them. Okay, good. They just keep running behind me and distracting the hell out of me. But you need to be able to understand that and acknowledge it. And if you have a dual role, that needs to be in that coaching agreement. And then that way you can keep track of it. And if you do take your hat off and you start moving into a different direction, and I can only give a good example for me, is if I'm health coaching somebody and to that example of somebody showing some social anxiety, I might go ahead and be like, hey, let's go ahead and address that, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and change gears, and I'm going to give you a diagnosis to say that you have social and then we go down the whole rabbit hole of that, and then we'd almost change roles completely. But sometimes you can go back and forth between those roles, but it has to be a clear distinguishation of that, if I can talk.
And you got to manage it too. And Charlie just said between his yoga therapy and his health coaching, there's a little blur. And the other thing I'll use, that those dual roles is I was a Tai Chi instructor in the VA as well as being a health coach. I had a couple Tai Chi groups every week. If I looked at my group and there was 12 people in it and I was every one of their coach, and the reason they ended up in the group is because I referred them to Tai Chi. Was I referring them to Tai, how'd they end up in the Tai Chi? I got to ask myself those questions. You got to, if you're a personal trainer and all of a sudden all your personal trainer clients are also people you happen to health coach because you referred them to yourself. There's some ethical dilemmas there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, and that also brings it up because Abby put it in the chat too. You also have to be within your own scope. So if she's not an LCSW, she'd have to refer that out. I think, in my opinion, having clear distinguishing lines between those two is in that example of social anxiety. I will say in my personal practice, I would never do that. I would refer them out if they've been a coaching client of mine, and I would refer them to a colleague for therapy. Just because once you kind of have that relationship, in my opinion, you shouldn't go back on that relationship if you have a dual license. It's not practiced in the field as often. And it's obviously not practiced in the field because the national board talks about it, has an entire policy around it. They do talk about, making sure that you change those hats and do those things. But, I think it's something also to think about too, is if you do have another license, it's good, in my opinion, to keep those licenses separate regardless. Refer them out. Don't blur the lines. Articulate the clear roles and boundaries for each if you do. And then coaching can offer guidance for their other professionals when they're clearly informed the clients that they are doing so. So really, whenever we are able to refer them out, then we can, be able to help those professionals help the client because we might know a little bit more about them. So if I know in that last example, I think his name was Victor. If I know Victor better than that therapist that I'm referring him to, then, I can, I can be able to fill them in on certain things. So, all right. So let me look how many more slides we got here. We got a few more slides and then we'll take a break. Sharing information and resources, this is something that you will for sure have to spell out, right? Stay within your scope. Avoid providing guidance that is outside of your scope. Really, if you're providing guidance as a coach, you're already operating outside of your scope, right? Because we don't provide guidance. We share generic instead of individualized guidance. So, we can hopefully be able to get that information out there. We ask permission before we share, right? So even if we're going to share with that third party person, we're going to share it. So back to the generic instead of individualized guidance. Whenever we're sharing it with people outside of our agency, I tend to always keep that information more general than specific to the client. And then always ask permission first and get it written in writing that you get the permission to share. Use only nationally recognized credible sources, appropriately cite the contributions of others, and then use disclaimers. Sharing information and citing others' work, right? Recognize and honor the efforts and contributions of others. If they helped develop something, give them that credit. If they helped, develop the coaching agreement, whatever it is, let's be a good helping profession. So the future of regulation. So whenever we think about the future of regulation, like I've already said, the AMA is now approved our CPT codes. So that is a huge piece of moving forward. But again, that's going to come with a lot more responsibility. Anticipate more stringent regulations, which changes regularly. Right now that we have a Medicare reimbursement rate, they change all the time, right? They change every single year. Like I said, the other professions that was lumped into that telehealth group was physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. These are professions that's been around for a very long time, and they got their scope of practice expanded in that telehealth capabilities too. So it's constantly changing. It is the obligation of the professionals to understand the laws. I think I hinted towards that earlier. If you sign a contract, that contract has things outside of your scope of practice, it'll be your responsibility to stay within that scope of practice. Again, those people are not really focused on your scope of practice. They're focused on their credentialing process. So they might give you credentialed into something that might not be something that you can do. Whenever trying to work with others, and you always need the definition of intellectual property. You need to cite what you can, fair use doctrine. If it's out there and it's public domain, you are allowed to use it, right? If it is out there, you can use it. And it's the fair use doctrine that allows you to do that. Additional resource links, examples of intellectual property. We need to be able to cite all these different things and be able to go out there and implement these things so that way we're also protected. And we need to stay protected because of, anyway, we talked about this more in our business class. Whenever you go out and you start a business, there are so many things that you can set yourself up for failure just by putting your information out there. So remember that. We do have a business class that we offer, I forget, here in a few weeks that we kind of talk about organizational excellence, setting those things up. But ultimately, your intellectual property, you can get in a lot of trouble by using other people's intellectual property, and they will come after you. And sometimes they'll come after you not even knowing that. And I'll give you a good example is if you don't trademark your name and somebody else uses your name and they trademark it before you, you would have to stop using that name immediately, right? Or you would have to pay them to use that name. So, if you're getting a business started, A very simple thing is you need to trademark your name, or you would have to change everything within your entire business plan if somebody else came up with it. So keep that in mind. Just because you come up with a name doesn't mean it's yours. And even it could be your own name. If there's a business out there, you got to do your due diligence for that type of stuff. But then let's say you put your coaching agreement out there and you copyright it, and then someone else uses it. And then they say, you know, I use this coaching agreement, but this client still did X and now I'm getting sued for it. Since you copyrighted it and you put it out in the open, it could create liability for you as well. So
An extreme example is that rapper Diddy sampled a Sting song.
yeah,
He never got permission. He pays Sting $2,000 a day until the day Sting dies.
isn't that awesome?
That might be okay for Diddy to do that after we found out what he's. That's
Yeah, yeah,
fine.
yeah. We don't care about that. You know, we don't care about Diddy and his money loss. All right. Well, let's go ahead and take a break. Let's be back at 6:45. Take about a 15-minute break. All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Let me make sure my sound is still sharing. Okay. All right, let me know if y'all can't hear this.
The day I got sighted, I was blindsided. I couldn't believe that this was my life. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. To just have the carpet pulled from under my feet is just devastating. My name is Heather Kokesh Del Castillo, and I am a certified holistic health coach. I guide people to put in healthier foods, and in doing that, you can take away unhealthy foods. We're a military family, and 2 years ago, we had to move for the military, and we moved to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, from Monterey, California. California did not require a license for holistic health coaching. It never occurred to me that I would be prohibited in my career, and the only thing that changed was that I moved state to state. One day I was just sitting on my couch and got a knock on my door. An investigator said, "I'm serving you with a cease and desist and a $754 fine." I was taken aback. I was totally floored. I learned a registered dietitian decided to report me. That cease and desist meant that I could no longer health coach in the state of Florida. That meant that a piece of my income and my career and my passion was then suddenly squelched. The penalty is, if I don't cease and desist, first-degree misdemeanor, a year in prison, and a $1,000 fine for each offense. To be licensed in the state of Florida, I would need a bachelor's degree in health. On top of the bachelor's and master's degree I already have, a 900-hour internship, and to pass a board-certified exam. I just can't pursue getting licensed in the state of Florida because the requirements are just too lengthy and too financially burdensome. We're a military family. We may only live in Florida another 2 years. What I do is no different than a blogger or a book author who's able to publish freely their words and advice about nutrition. Someone can be a certified holistic health coach, write a book, publish it, and sell it in the state of Florida with the same advice I may give to an individual, but I can't meet with that person and talk to them. A lot of my coaching happens just over the phone and Skype or Google Hangouts. The First Amendment allows us to speak freely about nutrition, whether paid or unpaid. With the Institute for Justice, I am suing the state of Florida in federal court for my First Amendment right to discuss health and nutrition with other individuals.
All right, so where do y'all think Heather went wrong?
He didn't check what the state's laws were.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, right? Was she definitely didn't check where, she moved and had no idea, right? But then again, she was under the title of coach, right? So she kind of thought that's a national certification, so she thought she was probably good, right? What else do y'all think kind of went wrong in this scenario? Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I don't think she even read her own scope of practice and her own code of ethics. Because she said right in her testimonial, I can give nutrition advice. Do anywhere in this course have we told people that coaches give advice or they advise?
No. She said that she guides people towards a healthier nutrition or something. She even used the words like I guide people towards it, right? That alone is not what a health coach does, right? So a big piece of this is that. Now I'll say this case went all the way, I think, to the Supreme Court and was so Abby said, wasn't there even clarification that the Florida Dietetic Board said education towards general health and wellness was permitted? So yes, so I don't know. So there's also been a change beyond this. So, but I think the bigger picture is regardless, there's a difference between being a health coach and providing guidance towards a specific thing, right? She was providing nutritional guidance, right, towards something that is a dietitian scope of practice. So they overstepped into a dietitian scope of practice. And it went all the way up and she lost. You have to be educated to provide those types of services, and it's up to the state to determine that. So that was even, reiterated in that. But I'd also say this case really illustrates that as a health coach, going outside of the scope of practice, right? As a national board certified health and wellness coach, we would not be given advice, suggestions about what people should eat, right? If anything, we're going to tell them to go explore their own diet, right? Right. We're not going to tell them what diet they should be going on, and we definitely should not. Can y'all still hear me? Okay. Sorry, it started acting like it was acting weird. So maybe it's just Shaquan that's freezing for. Okay. But anyway, ultimately at the end of the day, you shouldn't do that, right? And then the board told her, like, you're not even educated to really provide this, right? At the end of the day, you have a bachelor's degree. Now, we'll say another evolution that's happened inside of the dietitian field is dietitians now have to have a master's degree. So even that information on there about the dietitian general education is out the window because now all dietitians are required to have a master's. And that is, in my opinion, I think good for the field, but the way they're approaching it's bad for the field. But it will hopefully increase people being able to access dietitians in the future. But I think that's a big thing, right? Is really at the end of the day, we shouldn't be providing any type of guidance to anybody. And there's another example that I have been trying to track down, but it was a business coach, right? The business coach was getting sued because they were a national board certified health coach, and they were providing business guidance and business types of advice. And then that person went back to their place of employment and implemented what that coach said and got fired. So then that person sued naturally and won against that coach because carrying the title of coach now is coming with a certain amount of expectations by holding that title. And anytime those expectations are being held and you go against those expectations, people will call you out and also will come against you. Because in that last example, it wasn't other people that turned her in, it was dietitians that turned her in, right? Because the dietitians are like, you're taking clientele away from us. So you also got to think about it from that standpoint whenever we start overstepping our scope of practice, is now we're stepping on other people's toes and they will start to fight back. And those are good examples of it, right? Even the business field is fighting back on it. So ultimately representing the professional background, accurately identify yourself as a coach and what you can do and understand the scope of practice so you can really, in those pieces. Representing professional background case study. So here, Victor became a national board certified health and wellness coach in October of 2019 and started his career in the health and wellness coaching in January 2020. He has no specific training in weight loss, though he has coached 3 clients who reached their weight loss goals. In his bio, he states expertise in coaching for weight loss. Is this an accurate and true statement? Why or why not? Why might it be better to phrase his background and weight loss different? So what do you all think about that statement? If you had helped people, 3 people, let's say, to be able to lose and achieve their weight loss goals, would that be a bad thing to put on your website or your LinkedIn or your Instagram, whatever it is, right? To start advertising that. What do you all think?
I do. I think it's wrong.
You think it's wrong? Why?
Well, yeah, because he's saying that he doesn't have any specific training in that. So, like, I mean, I would say maybe he just got lucky and like maybe those clientels were able to have like a calorie deficit and then we're like losing weight, and that's cool. but not everyone is the same. And then you also got to take in consideration that some people have like diabetes or different circumstances. So by you advertising that, you're actually running the risk of getting sued or actually hurting someone because of those underlying issues that he may not have any expertise in.
That's right. I mean, I think that's a great example is not understanding some of those pieces, right? If you don't have the education and you know, weight loss is such a tricky thing anyway, right? Is you know, there's so many variables that go into it. Yeah, that doesn't make him an expert if his credentials that are specific to weight loss. You know, if you're a personal trainer, then maybe you could probably add some things like that if you had that credential, right? If you're a dual credential, going back to those two hats, right? Um, so you know, I agree. I think misrepresenting yourself, but I'll also say, what is the difference between misrepresenting yourself and really going after clients and putting things like that out there, right? How many people have maybe exaggerated their own stuff on their resume, right? You know, so keep that in mind. It's a common practice, but once you put it out there, it is out there, right? So keep that in mind. Um, and I say that to say it is a very common practice to inflate your experience to make it sound better, to gain, you know, jobs, to gain clients, to gain all that type of stuff. Just be careful in the way that you word it whenever you start putting it out there. As a coach, I must agree to maintain, store, and dispose. Okay, so now we're moving into different things. We're going to start moving into some HIPAA and confidentiality and all those things. But before we jump into that, does anybody have any questions towards anything that we've talked about so far? Reimbursement models, you know, scope of practice, any of that type of stuff. Any questions leading up to this? Perfect. All right. So now we know if you're going to be a coach in private practice, you're going to have to store your own records, right? So you have to think about that. There is several programs that are free that you can grow with. So look into them. If you are interested in that, one of our faculty, Chad, has one that he uses. It does all of his billing and everything for him. It's solely dedicated to coaching too. So it's solely based on coaching. It's a great platform. So if you're interested in it, get with Chad. He could definitely get you that. And his, I think, is free up to, I want to say about 20 clients. Don't quote me on the number. And then you have to start paying for it. So basically you can grow, right? You get your first X amount of clients. Let's just say it's 10. You know, you start building some revenue and then you can pay for your electronic health record. That's the best way to do it. So some of the definitions, right? PHI, or PHI, personal identified information or personal health information. So the difference that you'll see is in the coaching profession, since they're not clinical, sometimes you'll see it identified as personal identifying information, but it's really PHI at the end of the day. It's protected health information. Confidentiality, you'll hear that a lot. You'll always have a duty to your client for confidentiality. Privacy, another piece, they always have a right to privacy and they have a right to secure. The moment that you start being a health coach in the field, you have to think of all these things. If you violate somebody's privacy, that is a liability, right? That is a threat towards your business. If you provide a security risk on your electronic health record, or let's just say you're handwriting notes and you don't have a policy in place on how long you keep them, which is directly said in the National Board Health and Wellness Coaching, you know, you could get in a lot of trouble through that. So keep that in mind. These are liability things that you have to keep in the forefront of your business, because these are things that can really hurt you. Overview or client confidentiality, you know, legal limits of confidentiality. We know there are some legal limits, right? Best practices, and then sharing information with third parties. Client confidentiality, coaches must protect client information, whether it's documented or verbal. I know hopefully if you do sessions in your home, like I have a sound machine right outside my office door so that nobody can hear me in there. So if you know, you have to think about that even if you're in your own home, because if your kid hears you coaching a client, that is a HIPAA violation, right? If your significant other is in the next room over and they hear it, That's a HIPAA violation. So, you know, the new teleworking environments has created more liability and risk. And legal limits, right? Suspected child abuse and elderly abuse. We already talked about that. Know your state. I'm pretty sure for suspected child abuse, at least every state is a mandatory report state. I don't know about elder abuse off the top of my head. Imminent threat to self and others. You know, I was actually talking about this the other day, and I don't even know why, but I had a kid that came into custody one time, and he drew an entire map of how he was going to kill his neighbors and other things. Had an entire diary of it and everything. The kid was in custody and had no opportunity to ever see those people again. He was only, I want to say, 13 years old, but we still had a duty to warn, right? So that was another thing. We still had to call that family. In my opinion, I was the therapist at the time, so I advocated not to call the family because I said he is no longer an imminent threat. But they argued that it was still an imminent threat, and they made the phone call anyway. So now you know, we told this family something that was probably, never going to happen. But anyway, imminent threat, right? You still have to report it. You know your states. There is sometimes some gray area with that imminent threat because in that situation, we removed the kid that did not make it an imminent threat anymore. So technically, you wouldn't have to report that. Illegal activities. Now, this is not the case in every state. Legal activities are illegal activities. If somebody tells you they're going to commit a crime, sometimes in some states, that is a very protected thing. So you may not be able to say that. So remember that. Make sure you know your state. Client confidentiality and best practices, right? Include a confidentiality statement. Like I showed in those ones, they all had a confidentiality statement. One of them had a privacy statement. So, kind of think about that in these targets that are threats towards your business. You should have it spelled out in your coaching agreement. Anytime there is a threat, it should be spelled out in your coaching agreement. Confidentiality best practices. Avoid exposure to information that you don't need. To see, this is very important because you can't unring that bell. If you see a client's protected health information and you weren't meant to see it, from a legal standpoint, they call that you can't unring that bell. That means you then violated that, and that is a violation that they could potentially sue you for. So another thing is don't take information that you don't need. Ensure a private setting for the coaching session, right? Like I said, make sure your set is private, because if again, they see kids in the background or they see your significant others, that could be a violation that could set up a lawsuit as well. Group coaching participants agreements to maintain confidentiality. We talk a little bit more about that in group coaching, but everybody that's in there is a participant, right? That's almost like unringing the bell. We can't stop people in that group from hearing what other people say. So once they do that, that sets up a liability, and we need to remember those liabilities and have a protocol for that liability to protect ourselves. Client confidentiality and sponsors, right? So establish a clear written agreement about what information can be shared. This goes back to the conversation that we were talking about earlier. Have everything written out, negotiate it. But if it's not written down and there's a gray area, that is going to be something that is definitely a risk area for your business. And, the best way to cover these is to talk to different types of lawyers. So if you go to a business lawyer, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a contract lawyer, right? A transactional lawyer is sometimes what they call it. So sometimes they're not the same. So you might need to go to a proprietary information lawyer that is very specific. So kind of know your niche before you do it and really think about the legal consequences of that. In the agreements, answer these questions. What will be shared? What will not be shared? With whom? How? When? And I would add something on here, frequency, right? Is there a frequency to it? Because if so, you need to know that. So here we go. Another true-false question, or a true-false question. Carrie has met with 51 employees for the first coaching session. Company X has asked, that should be Carrie, to provide suggestions for lunch and learns based on the employees' health goals identified in their sessions. So they're coming up with these lunch and learns, and they want it for all the employees, and they want it based on the things that Carrie is noticing in her sessions. True or false? This is sensitive, protect personal information and should not be shared. True. Carrie should obtain consent from her clients in order to share this. False. It is ethically permissible to share this information as long as Carrie doesn't share specific employee names. So what do you all think? True or
I
false?
think, hey, I think it's true.
I think it's true. Carrie should obtain consent from everybody before doing it. Anybody else? Yeah, everybody's, yeah. Wrong. No, I'm just playing. It is wrong. So it's only wrong because they were talking about general terms. So kind of going back to that health and wellness coordinator for your agency, they might be doing some individual sessions and then they notice trends. It's different to base a lunch and learn off a trend. If you're noticing a lot of burnout, you're not calling one person out. You're noticing burnout across your organization. So you're going to use that as a tool for the lunch and learn. So, that is not protected health information for a commonality and generality of what you kind of notice, right? That's just using data for a population health management process. So, I think that's a good way to distinguish it. Now, if they would have said, what specifically did Jennifer do? And I want to be able to target Jennifer in this lunch and learn, that would be different, right? That would be a violation. If it was like, oh, well, Jennifer's burning out, we're going to go do this. That would be a different process. So not individualized, but general, right? Privacy and security, record keeping. If you're with an organization, they're already going to have their processes set up, right? So you won't have anything, but you need to think of record keeping. You need to think of electronic files and data, electrical communication. Electrical communication is not just email. Your electronic health record can send out emails on your behalf or some type of messaging through that way. There's so many different lines of electronic communication nowadays that you really have to be able to. And you should always have a social media policy inside of your organization now on how clinicians, coaches, or whoever can approach social media and the subcontractors. So coaches must take responsible steps to protect client information, no matter what. In my opinion, if you're going to see clients, the best way to do it is to start with an electronic health record. Because if you do not, handwriting papers, things get lost. All it takes is one missed thing getting misconstrued or thrown out in the wrong pile and somebody finding it. Probably likelihood that it would ever get caught or brought back up is probably slim to none. But there's a reason why electronic health records are out there. If you do have to handwrite it, what I would also say is handwriting notes. Like I have a filing cabinet. I'm not going to say I've never handwritten notes. I have a filing cabinet that still has notes that are from 6 years and a half years ago from a private practice that I had. So you have to keep them, and depending on the state licensure and different things where you're at, depends on how long you have to keep them. Go ahead, Todd.
I just want to point out the onus and the responsibility to protect all this information is on the provider. It's on the coach. That client, they can share whatever they want with whoever they want.
That's right.
And you may hear things get back to you. Somebody may say, so I know Jimmy Bob is coming to see you or something like, and they shared that you did this, and you still got to protect that information. You can't disclose and things like that.
That's right. That's right. You are always under the authority to protect information. So whenever I'll always say, when in doubt, question sharing information, right? So if somebody asks you, even if it's a kid, and it's the parent asking for the information, I always tend to question, right? Am I legally allowed to do this? Because that will be one of the biggest things that will get you in trouble. All right. Best practices in record keeping, right? Keep records locked in a storage place. Typically, most accreditations say 2 locked boxes. It's pretty standard across them. I want to say CARF accreditation actually requires 3. Sometimes the third one can be as simple as a a folder that shuts and binds together. So it's really tricky with the different accreditations. Properly dispose of records after using them. Sometimes they have a agency that you can take them to, things like that, and you can shred them all at one time. But never leave unlocked things unattended. And if you're going to be in your house, this is where the biggest violations end up happening, is in your home, right? Because a lot of people have, their storage in the closet that's not locked, and then a lot of the papers will be all over the place, and not organized, and then you get audited, and then next thing you know, you don't have everything that you need. So record keeping, so plans for records, right? If you're using paper, again, I don't want to discourage you from using paper. It's easy, it's cost effective at first. So if you're starting your practice, it's a great way to start your practice, cost effective, cut some of the slack or overhead cost, but just be mindful of that. Electronically, in my opinion, a lot of those, if you were the one that, if you didn't mess anything up, then the burden is actually on the electronic health record people, right? So if they messed up and violated it, then it's not your violation. Be mindful of your notes. So I always say this, people sometimes read your notes on a regular basis, and they will call you and clarify those things. There's one time in the VA, I did not diagnose a veteran with PTSD, and by the time he got home, he looked at his record and called me and was very upset with me because I did not give him that, even though we talked about it. But you know how that goes. Our clients sometimes don't listen to those details. But that's a good example, is they will, if they see something in the record. And the reason why I say that is we go back to the original case study of somebody showing up based on getting financial gains, right? They show up twice, they get their financial gain. If they have some type of financial gain for showing up to you and you don't document it, that's another reason why we said put in protective things to where it's not on you or the decision why they're not getting that financial gain. Electronic files, password protected. Most of the time now, most things make you have the dual login, right? You have to have the text and verification before you can log in. Sometimes it's protected over so long. Your passwords, most accrediting bodies make you change your passwords every 90 days. But so keep that in mind if you're going to be accredited, if you're not. But even just protecting it, it's good practice to change your passwords every 90 days. Utilize privacy screens and mobile devices. That's another good way, but if you're at home, that may not be an issue. Enable encryption for data storage. That's another big piece that we can do, is always encrypt things if you can. If you're going to put things on a USB drive, for instance, make sure that's encrypted. And I think that's standard protocol for accreditations as well. You have to have that. And then that flash drive would have to be locked behind the locked door. That would be the dual lock. So the first lock would be the encryption that you put on the USB drive, and then the second one will be behind the locked door. There's so many different things coming out with cloud storage right now. So that is always going to be a barrier. I will say I do not have as much experience with cloud storage and some of the things that could go wrong with it. But obviously anything that is stored in something else other than like a USB drive that you have physical access to, or your own hard drives, is going to be a security risk, right? Because it's going to be stored somewhere. I don't even really know what the cloud is, and some, mysterious, gigabyte place. Make sure you don't have long idle screen times, and then safety purge client information data from time to time. And then have a plan in event of a security breach. So that's what I mean by having a security breach policy or a privacy policy. Whenever you have those policies, you'll have a plan. The plan would be, I'm going to reach out to every client, right? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to give them information on the breach and that type of stuff. Password protected emails. Some of this stuff is kind of self-explanatory, but a lot of times people don't know how to even set up their pass protected email accounts, right? Sometimes in like Google, you can put in the subject matter headline that this is, how do you word it? This is Man, now I forget. I'm gonna have to look that up before we're off today. But you can put it in, I want to say you put in private and then it'll make it a encrypted. Oh no, you put in encrypt and then it will, you put that in the subject and it'll encrypt the entire message. So you wouldn't even have to do anything major to that. And then Google does it in the background for you. Microsoft, you actually have to go in and physically hit the encryption button. So know those types of things about that if you're going to be sending emails that way. And assume the recipient's email account has only the minimum level of security. So everything you send out, you have to assume that they have the minimal level of security, which means you need to protect it even further and include only the minimum of necessary information. Safety purge, we already kind of talked about that. Purge that information out of your devices, be mindful and in public places, and be aware of voicemails, phone calls, and text messages. If you are going to do text messages, have a text messaging policy because that can be a slippery slope with clients. Subcontractors, require subcontractors who have access to that client information to sign confidentiality agreements and redo those confidentiality agreements annually. Offer training on privacy and security for all non-contractors. Provide access only to the information that is required to perform the job. So I want to go back to that. So whenever I say subcontractors, what I really mean is if you hire somebody as a 1099 to come into your facility, and then they are providing health coaching and has access to your electronic health record. Let's say that they access clients that aren't, that they don't have access to, that's a violation. So you need to be able to protect yourself. And whenever you 1099 that person and they violate that confidentiality, that does not fall on that 1099 person. That would fall on the agency, right? So you are the agency that is the representative of that. You hired that 1099 person, and if they violate it, that is a risk towards your business, right? So you would need a policy around that.
But the other thing too, Charlie, for like if you're going to be using your cell phones to communicate with clients, there's software or programs available out there that can like get rid of your personal number and say you're calling from another number and have encryption and all from your end of it, all things, kinds of things available. I just get a different phone, but
Well, no, that's a good point. There's so many apps out there. And so at Peak Valor Health and Fitness, we have Verizon. So whenever I can text people, if they have what would it be? Hearing issues, like we can text back and forth. We can do everything and it comes through as Peak Valor Health and Fitness, but I do it right from my phone. So there's it's another little Verizon app that you can use that does it all through there and
I
keeps it.
forget what the program was. The VA used to pay for me for something for my cell phone for telework days before they put the jabber phones on my
That's right.
computers. But
I mean, I think there's multiple ones that are out there. So look into it, be also protective of yourself. If you work from home, your business should actually be a PO box. If you work from home, you should not have your personal address as your business unless you live in a state that protects that information. Very few states protect that information. So remember that if you set up a business, do not use your personal address, use a PO box and protect yourself. That's a little bit more on a safety side and a little bit outside of this conversation. But, that is very important, is to protect yourself. And one of those ways is to have one of those apps and do not use your personal address as that. All right, so privacy and security question. Courtney is coaching on site with Company X and it's time for lunch. She places her client notes in a drawer in her office she is using and then closes the door to go to lunch. Upon returning, she grabs her notes and heads to the conference room for a meeting. During the meeting, Courtney exits the room to take a call, leaving her client notes in a closed folder on the table. Later, Courtney leaves her client notes in the folder in her locked car while she picks up dinner on her way home. So how many times did Courtney compromise her client's information through that whole process?
So she didn't lock her office door, she just closed it?
Yeah.
This is a conference room for a meeting. During the meeting, cry. Exits the room. I'm thinking at least 3.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say at least 3, but I would definitely say 4, for sure, right? She violated it so many different times, right?
Yeah.
Right. She basically was being willy-nilly with these client notes. So, I think this is a good example. I think this is a good example of complacency. There is
Yeah.
no doubt in my mind as a therapist that I did something like this in the past, working for an agency. There is no doubt but this, in my opinion, is a good example of complacency with client notes. And it's easy to fall into that, especially working for an agency or even working in your home. But we need to make sure that we're not complacent through those. So this says it was 2 times. I would say it was violated many times, and I think it was so loose that there should be so many different things. And at the beginning, this door should have been locked, right? Whenever she went to lunch, she should have, it's locked twice, right? And then upon returning, she grabs her notes and went to a conference room. In my opinion, the moment she opened that folder and started looking at client notes and at the conference meeting, that was a violation of HIPAA as well, right? I get that she's trying to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone, but in my opinion, there's so many different ways. But very much an issue. HIPAA basics, right? Legislation, entities subject to HIPAA, and protected health information. So HIPAA legislation, right? HIPAA came out in 1996. There's been many laws that continue to come around. There is no doubt that there will be many more that will come out. I think we'll see more policies around health information with social media. And different things like that. I think it'll be many different things that'll come out, but so many different policies over time. And in the real big picture, it's really just to protect clients' information. So covered entity is any individual or company that electronically transmits personal health information. So healthcare providers, health plans, clearinghouses. But if you have any type of personal health information and you transmit it electronically, you are a covered entity in HIPAA. Business associate, any entity that has direct or incidental access to personal health information. So another example of this, sometimes that people don't think of, is if you own a business, your cleaning crew needs to sign a confidentiality agreement, right? If somebody's coming in and cleaning your office at night, people don't think that that's another business associate that could have access to those documents. So there needs to be a confidentiality agreement. But there's all kinds. There's legal, financial, all kinds of different types of storage and things that you would have to do. Subcontractors, that might also fall with the cleaning crew, but they should most certainly be filing that, right? But this is any entity that has direct or incidental access to that information. The privacy rule protects all individually identifiable health information. So we want to make sure that we are protecting everything. And we have to remember that while we are protecting those things, there's going to be so many different pieces that we have to represent, right? The individual's past, present, and future physical and mental health conditionings. So I think that's another big piece, is the future piece. A lot of times we view HIPAA as only things that had passed. But if there is something in the future, and a good example of this might be, is if somebody is, oh man, I almost said pre-diabetic, and they're on the verge of being diabetic. And then you think in the future it's okay, oh, they're going to be diabetic in the future. That is a HIPAA violation, right? So remember that. The provisions of healthcare to the individual. And then, of course, the payment process is also a HIPAA process. Examples of conflicts of interest, taking appropriate action. So conflicts of interest. So some examples for conflicts of interest that gets coaches in trouble, right, is the promotion of products and services. Anytime you add a weight loss drug to your program, or you add a Oh man, I don't even know what else it would be, but those are typically the things that get coaches into trouble is supplements, weight loss drugs, things like that. And they kind of recommend those things. And then they, people get hurt whenever that stuff happens or nothing happens and then they still get in trouble. So compensation from the sale of the product or service. So if you're pushing a product and that product ain't that good, you could be in a lot of trouble. But then a lot of times what happens is the emphasis of a portion of that session is focused on pushing products, which is against the code of ethics for a coach. Funny because those who are out there selling weight loss supplements are calling themselves health coaches. You're absolutely right. And that's exactly right. Is our scope of practice says that if you spend any of that session on these types of things, like you're violating the ethics, right? Sometimes it's different. The way, and there's gray area, and the way that coaches are getting away with it in the gray area is this piece right here. It's different to say, hey, we can talk about future coaching sessions, group coaching sessions, and things like that. But then that gets blurred in with a lot of these different products. Naturally, things get construed in some of those gray areas. Use of role for inappropriate gain. There's so many different ways we could probably say this, but let's just say you have a client that you coach that is also a business director for somewhere that could get you a contract, and you use that relationship as a coachy client and then gain that contract. That could be inappropriate gains at the end of the day. There's probably a lot of other examples, but I think that's typically what people get in trouble the most for, is trying to use their clientele to gain something, right? And if you use your clientele to gain something, that's probably an inappropriate gain. Personal gain from those referrals. And this would be more like, I know that I'm coaching the principal at my daughter's school, so I'm going to try to get that principal to give my daughter an extra advantage in her extracurricular activities or something along those lines. But that is something that does happen on a regular basis too. But I'll also say it is common practice in the field of the helping profession to scratch each other's back. So there's always going to be conflict in that common practice in the field. And what I mean by that is, I'll just go back to the VA. Whenever I was supervising chiropractors, um, our chief chiropractor, he would always bring people in from around the hospital and give them adjustments because it helped our service out, right? Whenever we needed to go to HR, we had a streamlined, and favorable thing. So, it is a common practice in the field to scratch each other's backs. But whenever you really start to get inappropriate gains and personal gains out of it, it becomes a problem. What other areas do you all see conflicts of interest happening in the coaching field?
Did you say like personal relationships?
Personal relationships, that is most certainly another one. Yeah. Because, I think a lot of professions name, especially like sexual relationships or intimate relationships in their code of ethics. I think social work says you can't do it ever. I think some other professions name like 3 years or 5 years, or, there's always a portion of that is always covered. But that's right, definitely a personal relationship. And I used intimacy because that always tends to be the one, but there's other personal relationships like family and other things like that you want to steer away from. Let's see, anything else? Moving on. Taking appropriate action, all right? Disclose the conflict, potential, or perceived conflict of interest. Because once you disclose it, you're taking appropriate action. So that shows that you're doing that action. If you have a dual relationship, make sure that dual relationship is noted. Offer to remove self and terminate the coaching relationship, right? Give them the opportunity, refer them out, do those types of things. And then seek guidance from a mentor, right? Reach out to whichever accrediting bodies you want to be a part of and be a part of those communities and ask those questions. I see people all the time on the Facebook group for National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coaches asking questions like this all the time. So be curious about the field, ask those questions, seek a mentor. I think those things are reasonable and often practiced. All right, so here we have Jenny is employed at a health coach gym or as a health coach at Dylan's gym. The gym recruits members for complimentary health coaching, though some may not be ready to make a change. Among other metrics, Jenny's performance is based on her client's progress on her goals. So is there a conflict of interest whenever Jenny's performance is based on the progress of their goals, but she doesn't have access to the recruitment process? Would there be a conflict of interest here?
I say yes, just because they're using health coaching as an incentive to get in there. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want it or they're going to use it.
That's right. That's right. And then again, her money is tied to that too. So then it's like, you're in this catch-22. So anytime I think there's a financial gain based on that process, it's a red flag, right? So I think that's a good catch. And then we don't control whether they make progress towards those goals, right? We can't control whether they're going to not eat that cheeseburger at night or, whatever it is. So I agree. All right. So hooks and emotional triggers. So more ethics scenarios. So whenever we think of coaches can get hooked, are especially interested and pulled by a client situation, particularly if they can relate to the client situation. So a lot of times we get triggered. Again, I know I harp on this as new coaches or existing coaches, mental health professionals, whatever it is, right? We tend to go towards a population because we relate to that population. So whenever we do that, we're going to get triggered more. We're going to get hooked in to those different conversations that we probably shouldn't be engaged in otherwise as a coach. Conflict or discord in a coaching relationship. Sometimes you might end up disagreeing with something that your client says that they're going to go do, right? You might have that conflict regardless, and you're going to have to figure those types of things out. Diminishing and our lack of value for the client. So if you really feel yourself having this conflict of really hating your client, right? This diminished or lacked value for the client, it is really time to start thinking about referring them out. But these are real things that we deal with, and I think it's very important for us to know. So final note on regulation, right? The scope of practice is the scope of practice for health coaching will continue to shift and evolve. We need to keep an eye on the VA. We need to keep an eye on Medicare. We need to keep an eye on Medicaid in each state as it evolves. And also, hopefully, as it evolves and we get 250,000 health coaches, we'll have state licensure and continue to advance in the reimbursement model. Right. And then anticipate more stringent regulations. I've already mentioned that once. Being accredited by Medicare brings or being able to be reimbursable by Medicare brings a burden. And that burden is that it is going to take regulation, it's going to take policy, it's going to take filling, it's going to have claims returned multiple times. It is going to be a stringent process. It is the obligation of professionals to understand the laws that regulate their profession, right? I know we talked about that, showed the video, but it is your job. If the credentialing body messes up your credentials, that is not on the credentialing body. It is on you because you had the final say-so on seeing a client. And then be mindful of jurisdictions, right? States change. We see that all the time. And if you're claiming the title of a coach, that now comes with a certain level of responsibility and expectation. And that's going to be held accountable by your peers and other professions, and they will call you out for it. Culturally sensitive, right? Coaches agree to refrain from unlawful discrimination in occupational activities, including, people, right? People come in all different types of shapes, sizes, races, orientation, to anything, right? And we cannot discriminate against them. And I will say, if you have a bias towards a particular group of people, you know, accordingly have a plan for that. Like I said, all people have biases. And if that is your bias, then don't accept any clients along those lines, right? Always refer those clients out. I think a lot of times we have this shame and guilt around our own personal biases instead of having conversations around it. And I wish we as a profession would have more open conversations to say, I tend to not like working with felons, right? Or whatever it is, and I don't want to work with them, so I'm not going to accept any of them. And then that'd be okay, right? Be like, oh, well, okay, well, I'll take all of them, right? Send them all my way, right? And then that way, we can work with them instead of it being such a taboo conversation. But again, we should never discriminate against anybody, no matter what, but those biases exist. And in my opinion, having a bias does not equal racism. It equals sometimes a lot of ignorance and other things. So let's see, here, cultural sensitivity and honoring other people, right? We know that culture has such an influence in health and wellness. And if we don't embrace other people's cultures and we incorporate cultural competence inside of our coaching, we are setting our coachees up for failure, and also ourselves, because we're going to continue to run into roadblocks in this field. And we can learn so much from so many different cultures. So demonstrate cultural sensitivity and honor the differences of others. That is the biggest thing I feel like we could do up front, right? Is to be able to do that. We acknowledge it. We acknowledge the lack of familiarity. Man, listen and watch for unease, right? If we see that somebody's unease at something that we say, let's talk about that. Ask questions, and invite dialogue. And I know I wasn't there for the cultural competency, or not cultural competency, but the cognitive bias. But I always give an example whenever I teach that course. Is I give an example of the first time I ever worked with a transgender person, and I was in the VA. I was familiar with the LGBTQ plus community because I worked in community mental health, but I typically worked with adolescents. So I never worked with or had never had anybody in my office that identified as a transgender person. So whenever that person came to my office, the very first time I met them, I acknowledged that I had no idea what they were. I even told them right out the gate that I'd probably say things that were going to be offensive, and just know that right out the gate, that is coming from a place of ignorance, right? Not a place of hate. So please, educate me. Don't get offended, and we can have this open dialogue. And then there was oftentimes that we would share that type of conversation to say, hey, because if y'all hadn't noticed, I always like to say, hey, man, right? But to somebody that's a transgender male to female, that could be very offensive, right? And I didn't know that, but it's just part of my common language. But then we could have that dialogue back and forth instead of getting offended by it whenever I said, all right, we're almost done, man. Right. And then not get offended by it.
And
Also call me out. Okay.
yeah, inviting that dialogue is huge too. I had a situation where we had a new coach come on board and we sent them through a coach training, the VA coach training, and he was Native American. And, cultural competency, cultural humility. I was having a conversation with him about how it's going into coach training, and in Native American culture, making eye contact and things is not one of their strong suits. And he kept getting feedback on it that he wasn't making eye contact in his coaching session, in his mentored sessions. And, he says, I'm trying, I'm working on it. And I went to the faculty and said, hey, we got to have a little cultural sensitivity here when we're providing this person feedback. And I mean, he was trying to adjust because he was trying to conform to the process, but got to have that understanding with them too.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, right? I think ultimately invite dialogue also means approach people with curiosity, right? You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they have. You don't know, if they're not making the eye contact, if they're not wanting to shake your hand, if they're not wanting to be sitting close to you, you know, those are all signs that we should be looking out for. If we say something and we see somebody's complete demeanor completely change, whether it's happy or sad or frustrated, we should be able to notice those things and then invite that dialogue. If we say something, you know, that's offensive to somebody, or if we're grading them on something, you know, that's a good example. If we're grading on them something, we should know their cultural competency. You know, that's a very good point, right? We should know that if they're not making eye contact, or we should at least approach that with curiosity. If you're not making eye contact, that could be a cultural thing, right? So I think that's great. Let's see, cultural sensitivity, recognize your own biases, right? Assumptions and prejudice. Like I said, they all exist. Anybody who says that they don't have any biases, assumptions, and prejudices are lying, right? They have no idea, they lack self-awareness, and don't hire them as a coach. I'm just playing. But it's, you know, people do have those biases. It's normal, and it's very normal to not know your own biases. That's the reason why there should be trainings on it, and people should, you know, look at this on an ongoing basis. And cultivate awareness of health disparities and inequities. You know, this is a big piece in today's healthcare system, is we are constantly looking at the inequities and health disparities between populations and different things. You know, this I just have up here, but, you know, African Americans make up 13% of the US population, but represent almost half of all new HIV cases, right? So that's something to kind of know, right? And kind of think about, especially if we're working with people with HIV. That the African American population will be harder or more impacted. But this also helps us create awareness campaigns and different things to hopefully impact those communities. But I feel like we're drastically failing in a lot of those areas. But anyway, I think it's a good place for us to be able to help and impact. So let's see, any questions about tonight's material, comments, concerns? Want to reiterate anything at all? Because that's really all the material we had for tonight. Not too
There's a
easy.
lot.
I know. I feel like this night is always heavy because it's dry material, you know, those types of things, but we try to break it up a little bit. All right. Well, if there's no questions, then we're free for tonight. Abby, I'll get you that information on the Medicare stuff. I was trying to look it up as we were teaching, but I couldn't get it done. But I'll
And
send
we're
that.
meeting next Thursday for July 4th, because I probably won't be.
Next week we're off. We come back in 2 weeks.
Okay, good. Thanks.
America's birthday.
That's right. America.
Well, how do we receive CEs for today? Thanks for that. If you want CEs, mental health, coaching, yoga, nursing, and what else? That's it, I think. You'll get a survey after this, and you just pick which ones you want. And it'll come from Haley Cochran. Yep. All right. All right. Well, if y'all need anything, holler at us. Otherwise, we'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
Todd,
Yeah, I'm Rondo. I was just gonna say your name as well. Can we get this scheduled?
yes.
I'll leave y'all on then.